a security camera recording an empty hallway. The red light is blinking, the lens is capturing photons, the data is being written to a hard drive. Technically, that system is seeing the hallway. It is processing visual information. But is it aware of the hallway? Does it know that it is seeing?
Most of us would say no. It's just data processing. There is no ghost in the machine feeling the experience of the hallway.
Right. Now, imagine a human being walking down that same hallway. Their eyes do the same thing. Lens captures light, retina sends signals, brain processes data. But for the human, the lights turn on. There is a me behind the eyes. There is a subjective feeling of being there.
And that transition from data processing to felt experience is the single greatest mystery in the universe.
You are conscious right now. You are seeing these words or hearing this voice. You might be feeling curiosity or skepticism, or maybe just the pressure of the headphones on your ears. Science can describe the mechanics of all that. We can map the neurons firing when you hear a sound. We can track the chemical signals of curiosity.
But nowhere in that map do we find the experience itself. We can't find the color red inside your brain tissue. We can't find the feeling of pain in a synapse. This is the hard problem. And in this series, The Great Investigation, we are going to test the world's major theories of consciousness. We aren't here to preach. We're here to crash test these ideas against reality.
Today we start with a theory that asks a disturbing question. What if consciousness doesn't arise simply because you perceive the world? What if you only become conscious because a different part of your brain is watching you perceive it? What if awareness is just the mind watching itself? This is the core idea behind higher order theories of consciousness.
It's often called HOT for short, higher order thought, and it proposes that mental states like seeing a color or feeling a pinch are not conscious in and of themselves. They only become conscious when a higher level process looks down and tags them.
So under this model, I could look at a tree, my eyes could process the tree, my brain could identify it as a tree, but I wouldn't actually experience seeing it unless this secondary system kicked in.
Precisely. Imagine your mind is a hall of mirrors. Thoughts appear, emotions bubble up, raw sensory data streams in. According to philosophers like David Rosenthal, who is really the godfather of this theory, none of that first-order stuff is conscious. It is dark. It is silent. It is just machinery.
That is a terrifying image. It implies that most of my brain is a zombie?
In a way, yes. Rosenthal argues that a mental state only lights up, only becomes something it feels like to be you when a second mental state targets it. You need a higher order thought that says, effectively, I am in this state. You aren't just angry. You are aware that you are angry. You aren't just seeing blue. You are aware that you are seeing blue. Without that second layer, the first layer is just biology doing its job in the dark.
This distinction between the first order and the higher order is crucial here. Let's make sure we have this locked down. First order is the raw data.
Right. First order is the representation of the world. Your optic nerve building a map of a coffee cup. Higher order is the representation of that representation. It is the mind looking at its own map and saying, I see a coffee cup.
And the claim is that consciousness is that second step.
Yes, consciousness is meta-perception.
This sounds very abstract, but there is actually some compelling neuroscience backing this up. It's not just armchair philosophy. When we look at how the brain is structured, particularly the prefrontal cortex, things get interesting.
The prefrontal cortex is the evolutionarily newest part of the brain, right behind your forehead. It's involved in planning, decision-making, and complex thought. Higher order theorists point to this area as the likely seat of these higher order thoughts. And they rely heavily on a phenomenon called blind sight to prove their point.
Blind sight is one of those things that sounds made up until you read the clinical reports. You have patients with damage to their primary visual cortex, the part of the brain at the back of the head that processes vision. They will tell you flat out, I am blind, I cannot see anything. But if you throw a ball at them, they catch it.
Or if you ask them to guess whether a light is flashing in their blind spot, they will say, I don't know, I'm just guessing. But they will guess correctly 90% of the time. The information is getting in. Their brain is processing the location and movement of the object, but they have no conscious experience of it. It is dark to them.
This seems like the smoking gun for higher order theory. In blind sight, the first order processing is working. The data is there, but the connection to the higher order system, likely the prefrontal cortex, is broken. The brain knows, but the person doesn't.
Exactly. Neuroscientist Haquan Lau has done extensive work here. His research suggests that subjective awareness correlates more with activity in the prefrontal cortex than with the sensory areas themselves. You can have a lot of activity in the visual cortex, but if the prefrontal cortex isn't looping back to check on it, you don't report seeing anything.
So consciousness isn't raw perception, it's the paperwork. It's the manager in the front office reading the report filed by the factory floor.
That is a very unromantic way to put it, but yes, it explains a lot about the human condition. It explains self-awareness. It explains why we can drive a car on autopilot and not remember the trip, because the higher order system wasn't paying attention to the driving, so the driving happened unconsciously. It explains the feeling of knowing that you know.
It also fits beautifully with our linguistic nature. We are storytelling creatures. If consciousness is essentially a thought about a thought, a linguistic or conceptual tag, then it makes sense that our consciousness feels so tied to our internal monologue. But this is where the theory starts to crack for me. If I need a higher order thought to be conscious of a first order perception, what makes the higher order thought conscious?
This is the classic objection, the infinite regress. If thought A is only conscious because thought B is watching it, then thought B must be unconscious unless thought C is watching it.
And thought C needs thought D. It's turtles all the way down. You never actually get to a light bulb moment. You just have an endless chain of bureaucracy.
Rosenthal has a defense for this, though. It's a bit tricky. He argues that the higher order thought itself does not need to be conscious. The second thought is unconscious. Its only job is to shine a light on the first thought. So A is conscious because B targets it, B is unconscious, the chain stops there.
So consciousness is the result of an unconscious process targeting a different unconscious process.
Yes, two dark rocks struck together create a spark. But you're right to be skeptical because this leads to the second, and I think much more damaging problem, babies and animals.
Right. If consciousness requires a complex thought, a conceptual representation that says, I am in this state, you need a level of cognitive sophistication that a lot of creatures just don't have. A newborn baby doesn't have the concept of I. It doesn't have the concept of seeing. Does that mean the baby is not conscious?
Peter Crothers, a philosopher who defends a version of this theory, actually bites the bullet on this. He has argued that because animals lack these higher order concepts, their pains and perceptions are not conscious in the way ours are. They might react to damage, but they don't feel it because they can't think, I am in pain.
That is horrifying, and it feels intuitively wrong. When a dog gets its tail stepped on, the yelp suggests an immediate felt experience. It doesn't seem like the dog needs to draft a mental memo saying, subject is currently experiencing caudal discomfort in order to feel the pain.
That's the problem of misrepresentation. If consciousness is just a thought about a state, what if the thought is wrong? What if I have a higher order thought that I am seeing red, but my eyes are actually closed? According to the theory, I should see red. The thought creates the experience.
So reality doesn't matter, only the report matters.
To an extent. And then there's the third problem, which comes from the other end of the spectrum. Not babies, but masters. Deep meditation, athletes in the zone. people in shock.
We often describe flow states as moments where the internal chatter stops, the narrator shuts up. I'm not thinking I am running, I just am running. But I am still conscious. In fact, many would argue I am more conscious in that moment than when I'm analyzing it.
Exactly. Higher order theory requires reflection. It demands a split mind, the doer and the watcher. But in deep meditation, that split heals. The subject and object merge. If HOT is true, that state should be unconscious. But people report it as the most vivid awareness possible.
This brings us to the spiritual dimension, because when you first hear higher order theory, it sounds a lot like what Buddhism or Vedanta teaches, the witness, the observer. You are not your thoughts, you are the awareness watching your thoughts.
It does sound similar, but there is a crucial inversion here. Spiritual traditions generally teach that awareness is the ground of being. It is primary. It is there before thought arises. It is the canvas the thoughts are painted on.
Whereas HOT says awareness is a product of thought. It is the paint, not the canvas.
Right. In the spiritual view, you don't need to think to be conscious. You just are. In HOT, you have to think to be conscious. It turns the mystic view on its head. It suggests that the witness isn't a soul or a fundamental self. It's just a cognitive feedback loop.
Which leads us to a very modern version of this idea, simulation theory. If we are living in a coded reality, how would you design an avatar?
You would build it in layers. You'd have the physics engine, the body interacting with the world, and then you'd have a monitoring system, a script running in the background, checking the status of the body. Health, 80%. Vision, obstructed.
And HOT suggests that consciousness is just that system monitor. It's the debugging window.
But the question remains, does a debugging window feel like anything? A computer can monitor its own temperature. It knows if it's overheating. It can even take action to cool down. It has a higher order representation of its first order state. But is the computer conscious?
I think that is the fatal flaw. HOT explains access. It explains why I can talk about my experiences. It explains why I can write a diary. It explains the narrated self, but it doesn't explain the feeling.
It explains knowing, not being. It explains the mirror, but not the light reflected in it.
So where does that leave us? We have a theory that matches the neuroscience of reportability. It explains why damage to the prefrontal cortex messes with our awareness, but it fails to explain why it feels like anything at all. And it potentially denies consciousness to animals and babies.
My verdict? Higher order theory is a brilliant description of human self-consciousness, the ability to reflect, the ability to be an I. But as a theory of raw experience, the redness of red, the hurt of pain, it feels hollow. It confuses the map with the territory.
It confuses the accountant with the artist. The accountant knows exactly how much paint was used, but he doesn't see the painting.
And ultimately, if consciousness only exists when the mind watches itself, we have to ask, what is watching before the mind begins to think? Is there a light that is on before the switch is flipped?
That is the question. And in the next episode, we are going to explore a very different idea. One where consciousness isn't a private feedback loop in the frontal lobe, but a massive broadcast system throughout the entire brain. A spotlight on a dark stage.
Global workspace theory.
This has been The Great Investigation. If you found yourself watching your own mind during this episode, send this to a friend who likes to think about things.
Introducing Iris, a journey through the unknown in pursuit of the ultimate truth by Emmett, a compelling exploration that will captivate the discerning reader seeking answers beyond the ordinary. Imagine standing on the threshold between the known and the unseen. Emmett's Iris leads you through labyrinths of philosophy, spirituality, and science, challenging every presumption and uncovering gems of wisdom that lie buried in the everyday. With measured eloquence and sharp analysis, Emmett constructs a narrative both personal and universal, inviting readers into a realm where questions matter more than answers. Iris is not merely a book. It is an invitation to awaken, confront uncertainties, and define your ultimate truth. Entrepreneurs, professionals, thinkers, and seekers, Iris is the essential volume for those who desire clarity amidst complexity, crafted for minds unafraid of embarking on a profound journey. Now available on Amazon. discover a pathway to enlightenment, fresh perspective, and self-realization. Visit www.emmettpublications.com to learn more. Iris, where the unknown becomes the first step towards your truth.